Today we're going to discuss two important topics. On one hand, what has happened after a total of 170 days of using trading bots. You'll get a personal report of my experiences from my perspective. What did I particularly like? What worked especially well? But of course, on the other hand, what didn't I like so much? What losses may have occurred as well? So we'll also talk a bit about my personal mistakes, which you can then avoid. Otherwise, in the second part of today's video, we'll set up a total of 5 new trading bots because in my opinion, the current market situation is perfect for launching new trading bots. That's why it's definitely worth sticking around until the end today. You can really look forward to that because you'll be able to watch me live as I personally set the parameters for each trading bot in practice and see how I currently approach my own trading bot strategy. Otherwise, so that you're informed and up to date, today is basically the update video after a total of 170 days. If you search on YouTube for Crypto Vincent Trading Bot, you'll see that I recorded an update video 3 months ago. That was basically the 70-day summary, and just so you're aware, the whole self-experiment started exactly 5 months ago. I used a total of 10,000 euros, which I distributed among various trading bots, and today I'm going to give you the overall conclusion. Of course, I will keep all the trading bots running, so don't think that the bots are being shut down or anything like that today. There are actually some that I am truly convinced of. So if you want to stay up to date, feel free to subscribe so you don't miss any of the upcoming trading bot update videos, because things are definitely going to stay very exciting, and of course today we'll also be talking about losses and mistakes I've made. Let's take a look inside. There are also 2 trading bots in total that I didn't like very much. That's why in the conclusion today, we'll definitely be covering everything in full detail. So that's that for now before we get to the results in a moment. Any of you can check for yourselves on YouTube, Crypto Vincent Trading Bot. Yes, I've already gained quite a bit of experience. In fact, I recently got information from inside Pionex that I was the very first German-speaking crypto YouTuber to test all the Pionex trading bots. So by now I've been trying out all the trading bots on the Pionex platform for a total of 2.5 years. That's why personally I definitely bring a certain level of experience with me. I've probably tested over 100 different trading bots in my career, some of them actually on other platforms as well. So I've really been through quite a lot, including all the ChatGPT trading bots. And that's why today I want to give you a truly transparent insight, what actually works and what doesn't. Because one thing I can tell you, yes, I'm convinced by the Pionex platform, etc., but it has to be said very clearly, there are also some trading bots that I don't like as much. There are some trading bots that are actually unnecessary. There are some bots you really have to be careful with, and that's why I want to use videos like this to inform you and show you, let's say, where you can really get the most out of it. That's all I have to say about that for now. As I said, I've been using Pionex for over 2.5 years now. In that time, I've really tried out and tested quite a lot. I can honestly only say positive things about Pionex because sometimes the question comes up, hey Vincent, can you even trust the platform? Because one thing I can tell you, when it comes to trading bots, there are a lot of shady videos out there, or rather, a lot of things that simply don't work, especially when they're advertised with the term passive income. You really have to be extremely careful on YouTube. There are definitely some bad apples out there, or rather, some products and bots that just don't work. And that's why I declared this entire video series as a kind of self-experiment, because I'm not giving you any instructions on what you should do. At the end of the day, it's up to you to decide whether you want to try out such a bot or not. And that's why I want to use my YouTube videos to help provide insight into what actually works and what doesn't. That's all I have to say about that for now. As I said, on the one hand, now let's get to the results. On one hand, I have future grid bots running, but on the other hand, I also have spot grid bots running. What's the difference between them, briefly? With spot trading bots, trading is done without leverage within the bot itself, while with futures, you have the option to set leverage. Personally, I've had the best experiences with a leverage of 3 or 4. But we'll talk about that later, what makes sense there and what you need to watch out for, because obviously when leverage is involved, there's also more risk involved. That's all for now on that topic. So I think at first glance you can definitely already see the interim results. There's actually not much more to say about that. So we'll soon talk in detail about individual bots, about specific parameters, what makes sense and what doesn't. Now, first of all, I want to talk about a kind of mistake, or let's say about trading bots that maybe didn't work so well. Here I want to give you a general tip when it comes to the topic of trading bots. One thing should definitely be said right away. Even if you see a lot of green numbers here, all these trading bots are not miracle solutions. So that's something that needs to be mentioned as well. That's why we're going to talk about the progression here. In total, I closed 2 trading bots at a loss. You might ask yourself, hey Vincent, why did you even start those trading bots? Or, why did you end up closing 2 trading bots at a loss here? And I decided, yes, that was a bit of a minor mistake on my part. I basically ran the trading bots on the wrong assets. As we can see here, ARXBT and AKT are rather lesser known altcoins, and you have to keep in mind when you use leverage and also set the entire trading bot to long because you have several options. You can set the trading bot to long, short, or neutral. And in my case, I set up 2 long bots here. One on ARXBT. Let's take a quick look at the chart here and what happened. Yes, it was very boring on the chart. Yes, as we can see here, the chart is bleeding out. There's very, very little volatility, and overall, there's little strength, little momentum, and so on. That's why a chart like this isn't particularly suitable for setting up trading bots, because ideally, you need a clear trend if you're opening a long trade, and of course, you also need a certain amount of volatility. If the chart isn't really doing much here, just bleeding out, with little volatility, basically just drifting along, then for me personally, it no longer made sense to keep this trading bot running. It ended up going into the negative, and personally, I'd rather use the remaining capital for a new trading bot than just let something like this keep running. That's definitely my first takeaway. Only run trading bots on altcoins or assets in general that you really believe in, where there's a clear trend and a certain level of volatility. For example, if you look at a chart, say for Ethereum or other altcoins, there's just so much more going on there. And that's exactly why we have a trading bot here that performs significantly better. Let's take a look at it. In this case, it's over 100% in profit on Ethereum. I like this one extremely well because here we have the opportunity to structurally use individual sell-offs to buy more. And as soon as Ethereum pumps, as soon as we see green numbers, green candles, it gets sold off immediately. And of course, that's the perfect environment for a trading bot like this, which can work passively, buy when it's cheap and sell when it's expensive, so to speak. And that's why it's extremely important that you choose the right altcoins. That's why in part 2 of today's video, we'll specifically talk about certain altcoins that, in my opinion, currently look especially promising and are particularly suitable for setting up certain trading bots. So you really have to be careful not to set up bots on the wrong altcoins, so to speak, and that's why I personally decided to close both bots at a loss in this case. And that's why I'd rather use the capital for new trading bots with better altcoins where I'm more convinced. Otherwise, let's now talk about the positive trading bots. As I said, we've just discussed a learning experience, a mistake on my part. Now, I'd say let's move on to the overall results. So, all in all, I have to say I'm solidly in profit. So, at the end of the day, you can calculate for yourselves what the overall profit is, or rather, let's say the current interim result. And I should also mention here that the current timing of this video recording isn't even particularly optimal. If we take a look at Bitcoin, we can currently see a minor correction. Bitcoin is correcting. All the altcoins have also taken another hit. That's why, just a few days ago, the results would have been significantly better. But let me put it this way. On the one hand, I want to be transparent here, and on the other hand, I also want to set up new trading bots today. So it makes sense to take advantage of a red day, or rather this small correction, to set up new long trading bots instead of launching new bots when the numbers are already green. That's why, in my opinion, this is really an ideal time to set up new bots later on. Otherwise, all in all, when it comes to the futures trading bots, I am extremely satisfied. We can click on one of them, and then you'll see all the details here, showing how the trading bot has performed. I'll make the facecam a bit smaller, and then you can see the entire history of the trading bot in this case. And I really have to say, I'm truly impressed by how passively the bot has worked in the background. In this case, over 100%. That's $1,200 in profit that I was able to take here. And here we can see the performance, and I have to say, it really works smoothly. What I personally don't like about trading bots is a high drawdown. Personally, I don't find it pleasant when the trading bot has too much volatility, swings too far down or too far up. That's usually also an indication that the trading bot isn't working particularly cleanly, but in this case the performance looks very, very clean. So I really like it a lot. And if we take a look here and I click on individual days, you can also see at this point how many transactions were executed per day. And in my opinion, that's also the best setting you can choose, because at the end of the day, you don't want to end up paying a fortune in fees to the platform. And as you can see here, in the case of the Ethereum trading bot, I have about 2 trades a day, 4 trades a day, and sometimes even 0 trades a day. So sometimes there isn't any trading at all on a given day. And in my opinion, that's the best parameter setting you can choose, so that not too much trading happens, because otherwise the fees will eat up the profits. But on the other hand, of course, you also want to have some orders placed so that the volatility is properly taken advantage of. Exactly as we can see here with this trading bot, so you can basically see the buy orders in green and the sell orders in red. And in my opinion, this is the best setting in the case of Ethereum. Yes, we'll talk about that in a moment. How many grids, how many levels you should set per trading bot. That's all I have to say about that for now. As I said, Ethereum works best. Chainlink works very well. Dogecoin also works very well. Casper works very well. XRP works very well. Render doesn't work quite as well, I have to say. It's been running for quite a while and has only made 16% profit so far. But it should be noted that Render's performance itself wasn't particularly impressive. And here at the very end, we also have a Bitcoin futures trading bot, in this case with 3x leverage. Here you can see the individual grids. In this case, I actually set the grids a bit further apart. This bot is also intended to be more of a long-term trading bot. So I really want to keep this one running throughout the entire bull run. I want to let it run all the way up to $140,000 or $150,000, basically until Bitcoin reaches the cycle top. That's pretty much everything regarding all the futures grid trading bots. Later on, we'll do this in a moment, I will actually compound individual bots, because in this case, on Pionex, we actually have the option if we click on the trading bot here. For example, here we see the Casper trading bot. I really like this one a lot, and in my opinion, if we take a look at Casper, you can see here on the chart that it's also a good opportunity to add more or to compound the trading bot, which is basically an option we have here. In this case, we can reinvest all the profits we've made. We'll talk about what I'm going to do with that in just a moment. As I said, that will be in part 2. When I set up all the new trading bots, we will also compound some of the existing trading bots or make certain adjustments. So there will be several more options later on as well. Now, I want to wrap up chapter 1, which is about the conclusion. I'm extremely convinced by the future grid trading bots. By far, I like them the most, and the results here are also by far the best. Now, let's talk about all the trading bots in the futures sector. There are also a few that I don't particularly like. What I've always used in this case is the futures grid trading bot. That's, let's say, the standard option. I'll move the face cam to the left now so you can see on the right side in the futures section what options are available. Then there's also the CoinM Futures Grid bot, and here's the difference compared to the regular bot. In this case, you have the option to use the altcoin itself directly as margin. For example, if you set up a trading bot on Ethereum, the default setting is usually that it uses USDT as margin for the trading bot. But theoretically, you also have the option to use Ethereum itself directly as margin. That's essentially the function of CoinM in the futures grid. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it at this point, because for me personally, it's too risky. If Ethereum drops, then my margin also drops, and it becomes much harder for me to calculate things regarding the trading bot itself. In my opinion, it also carries a somewhat higher risk. Of course, in a bull market, yes, if let's say I were to start a new trading bot coming out of a bear market and I don't necessarily want to put USDT into the trading bot, but rather Bitcoin or Ethereum directly, then it can make sense. But in my view, I've always chosen the regular futures grid trading bot because here I can set the parameters much more precisely. At the end of the day, the variable is just too high for me here. That's all I have to say about that for now. Then there's the signal bot, which is an option if, for example, you program your own Pine scripts. For instance, I once connected a bot from TradingView using a ChatGPT trading bot, which then sends signals over to Pionex. It's really exciting and very interesting, but in my opinion, it's not for beginners. You definitely need to know exactly what you're doing. I've tried it out quite a few times already and have had some good experiences with it. But one thing I can tell you, if you really master the future grid trading bots and set the right parameters, you don't necessarily need a signal bot anymore. And the whole topic is also far too complex because you really need a solid strategy that has to be integrated. As soon as you have the wrong parameters, a trading bot like that can quickly go into the red. That's why I would definitely put something like that in parentheses for now. I wouldn't necessarily use it at the current time. Then there are cross-margin future grids. In this case, the difference is that your entire account is used to keep the trading bots alive. So, for example, if a trading bot drops more than 100% into the negative, and you have set everything to cross, then it can happen that you go more than 100% into the red, like 150%, 200%, because the margin, the capital in your account, is used to keep the trading bot alive. That can definitely end up being dangerous, especially for beginners. That's why I wouldn't recommend something like that. Personally, I want to be protected, and I want to set the parameters so that I can only lose the capital that I actually invest in the trading bot, so that the maximum I can lose is just that capital. And that's definitely the case here with the normal settings. But in the case of cross-margin future grids, it can definitely end up being potentially dangerous. That's why I would definitely advise against it here. Then there's the topic of the future moon bot, which personally doesn't interest me. It might be exciting for some people because arbitrage trading is used here. Yes, it basically buys and sells at a very, very high frequency to take advantage of small price fluctuations. Something like this can be interesting as a stablecoin alternative. Before you actually hold stablecoins, you can put them in here, but the returns aren't particularly high. It's not really exciting for me, so personally, I'm rather neutral about it. The name sounds better than it actually is, so it's basically unnecessary as well. With that, we come to the overall summary. Basically, you can forget about everything in quotation marks that's given on the right side here. I would actually focus exclusively on the regular future grid trading bots. That's definitely the best option at this point, and it's also where I've personally been able to achieve the best and most profitable results. So that's all for now on the topic of future grid trading bots. Now let's briefly move on to the topic of spot trading bots. I currently have 3 of those running as well. It's important to note that there's no leverage involved here, so the returns or profits you can achieve are rather limited. And you really have to ask yourself twice. I'll be completely honest here, I asked myself this too. Does it even make sense to set up a spot grid trading bot if you could just as easily invest in the altcoin itself through regular spot trading? So you really have to ask yourself, does the trading bot generate more profit with something like Chainlink than if I had just held Chainlink normally? The answer to that is definitely yes and no. Yes, sometimes that's the case, but sometimes not necessarily. It really depends on the market phase and also on how you set up the trading bot at the end of the day. In my case with Chainlink, I set it up to be bullish. This way, I had the opportunity to make quite a bit more compared to if I had just held Chainlink normally. That definitely needs to be mentioned. So I definitely like it quite a lot, but it's nothing special. So you shouldn't expect too much at this point either. It should also be mentioned that since I set up the trading bot, Chainlink itself has probably gone up 20 or 30%. In this case, I have just under 40%. So it's definitely very pleasant over time, I'd say, but at this point, it's nothing super special where I'd say you absolutely have to do it. You can definitely do it. It's a great alternative compared to just holding Chainlink normally in your portfolio. So if you just have Chainlink in your portfolio as usual, then it's definitely an option to say, hey, I'll set up a trading bot here and try to get a bit more out of it than with regular investing. Because the trading bot, of course, takes advantage of individual price jumps to sell at a higher price and buy at a lower one. So it's definitely a good option, but I would even say that it's almost more worthwhile to add a 2x leverage and then, at the end of the day, set up a future grid trading bot. In my opinion, that makes a lot more sense than trying to do something big in the spot market here. For example, the Ondo grid trading bot basically does nothing, it just kind of drifts along. It should also be mentioned that Ondo is currently only at 92 US cents, so not much has happened there at the moment either. That's why you can't put all the blame on the trading bot in this case. At the end of the day, it always depends on the asset as well. That's why I said earlier, always be aware and really be sure when you set up a trading bot that you know exactly which altcoin or which asset the trading bot is running on. Because if you have a coin that's completely bleeding out, then a trading bot won't do you any good at all. A trading bot can't save you from completely wrong decisions, and that's why it's extremely important at this point which coins you choose and with which parameters. As I said, we'll talk about that in just a moment. Now, just a quick summary here regarding the topic of spot grid trading bots. Especially as a beginner, it's easy to lose track here because there really are quite a few options and sometimes the name sounds better than the trading bot actually is. And I can also tell you at this point, you're not really missing out on much in the spot market. Of course, you can try out individual bots if you want. Infinity Grids is definitely fine. I currently have the Solana bot running there, which is up 26% in profit. That's fine too, but there's nothing there that I would say you absolutely have to get into. Yeah, some of them are definitely quite nice. For example, the Martin Engel bot. There, you have the option to keep buying at lower prices using dollar cost averaging. That can definitely be a great strategy. I can absolutely imagine that something like this could work really well in a bear market. It works if you set it up for Bitcoin, Ethereum, or Solana, allowing you to accumulate at good prices. But right now, setting up a DCA bot is definitely something you need to think twice about, in my opinion, especially in a clear bull market, in a clear uptrend like the one we're currently in. As I said, there is still support below us in the market. That's why, in my opinion, it currently makes the most sense to set up new future grid bots and to clearly position yourself long here as well, but again with low leverage. And now we're moving a bit towards the new trading bots that I'm going to set up. So at this point, let's switch over to our future grid trading bots. Here, in the top right corner, we now have the option to set up new trading bots. In any case, we select the future grid trading bot option, then we click on create. And what I always make absolutely clear at this point is to set things up myself. They do advertise the AI strategy here. I've already tried it out myself. You can definitely use it. It's an option if you have no idea at all. So if you're completely unsure about how to set the parameters yourself, it's definitely an option to just copy a preset bot here. It's a possibility, but for me personally, with my experience, I definitely want to take control myself, or rather, I want to set the parameters myself in the way that makes the most sense to me. So you have to ask yourself a bit, what makes sense for you? But with this video, you can also see a bit how I personally go about setting up trading bots and which parameters I later configure. At this point, we're definitely going to start with the very first trading bot that I'm going to set up from scratch, and I definitely want to set up another bot for Bitunix. In my opinion, we have a nice structure here from a technical chart perspective. We have a reference point here, and basically the origin, a contact point, another contact point, yet another contact point, and now we're back here at the lower edge. Also, in my own indicator KVBSO, we still actually have positive momentum. So for me personally, at the end of the day, everything fits. There we have a good overall package, and personally I am also convinced by Bitunix, and of course it's also extremely important when you set up the trading bots as I mentioned earlier. If you set up the trading bot on certain altcoins, then you also need to be convinced, and especially if you set the bot to go long, you need to believe that Bitunix will reach new all-time highs in the coming weeks, or at least continue to build on the current trend. So that's definitely my personal approach as well. Then, before setting up a trading bot, it's always extremely important to determine the price range. So now we're moving on to the parameters, to the settings, and the first point is the price range. So within which price range should your trading bot operate later? Where will all the orders be executed? Where at the end of the day will buying and selling actually take place? And it's definitely extremely important to determine a worst case scenario in advance. So what could happen to Bitunix in the worst case? Of course, in the worst case, Bitunix could also go to zero. That should be mentioned here as well, but the probability is extremely low. I'll show you now how I personally approach this. I see an origin here. I have a point of contact here and another point of contact here. So for me personally, the worst case scenario for Bitunix is $150 US. That's what I would say is the worst thing that could happen to this coin right now. and you definitely need to make sure your own trading bot is prepared for such a scenario. That's why we'll also be talking about leverage in a moment to make sure you're not exposed to too much risk. So I'll set the price range here between 140 US dollars. That's what I would call my worst case scenario, the lower price range where the trading bot should definitely still be buying more. So if something like that does happen, my trading bot will place new buy orders here. That's definitely very, very important to me. So otherwise, I'll set the upper price range a bit above the all-time high. In my case, that's about 1,000 US dollars, which is roughly the price range where I'll set up the trading bot. Now, of course, there are people who say, hey Vincent, don't you think Bitunix will go above 1,000 US dollars? And personally, I would actually answer that with a yes. So I can easily imagine that 4-digit prices will be reached $1,100, maybe even up to $1,500. Who knows at the end of the day, but the good thing about the trading bots, which I want to mention here already, is that we have the option to adjust the upper price range afterwards. I can quickly show you that right now. If I go to Ethereum, I can later click on details, then click here on more, and then I have the option to adjust the price range afterwards, and theoretically, here with Ethereum, I could also set it to 10,000 US dollars. Who knows, I won't do that with Ethereum in this case, but I still wanted to point out that you do have the option to adjust everything again afterwards. That's why we're going back now and setting up a future grid bot for Bitunix or Tau. Up here we enter Tau USDT. In my case, the lowest price is 140 US dollars and the highest price is 1,000 US dollars. So with that, I've definitely completed all the settings. Within the price range between 140 and 1,000 US dollars, if anything happens, I can always add more margin later or adjust the price range upwards. So in any case, we definitely have enough options here to act later on if needed. Next, secondly, the number of grids. Now it definitely gets especially interesting, because this is an area where you can definitely make mistakes. In theory, we can just click on recommended, so you can see what, let's say, is being suggested here. In this case, Pionex has recommended a total of 500 grids to me. Personally, in my opinion, that's a bit too much. You always have to keep in mind, of course, that at the end of the day, Pionex wants to make as much money as possible, to generate as many fees as possible with your trading bot. And that's why it's also plausible that a few more grids are recommended here than would actually be usual. So you definitely need to be careful about that. For me personally, it's a bit too much. We can zoom in once. So in this case, there is really a lot of buying, and then selling again very, very frequently. So you'll probably have 5 to 10 trades a day. And for me personally, that's a bit too much. That's why I'm going to reduce the number of grids a bit to around 300 grids. And then we'll also be in a very, very good price range. So at the end of the day, you'll see here in the calculation, profit per grid minus fees. And now we have a value here of 0.24 up to 2%. In my opinion, that's completely legitimate and comfortable. Yes, so anything over 2% is too much as well. So I would say anything in the range between 0.1 and 2% is fine, based on experience. You could also set it a bit higher. Then in this case, we see 0.2 to 1.7. That's still okay. Yes, so that's roughly how I would set up the trading bot. 350 grids in the case of Bitunix or Tau. You also have to keep in mind, at the end of the day, on the one hand, how volatile is your asset? Yes, so Bitunix or Tau itself isn't extremely volatile. It actually stays relatively stable within the current price range, and it's important to clearly point out one thing when setting the number of grids. It's never about the grids themselves, but rather it's always calculated in relation to your price range. If at the end of the day I have a very, very small price range, for example in this case only 500, then of course the profit per grid changes. So it's extremely important to mention that you should never, so to speak, only focus on the number of grids, but at the end of the day you always have to calculate both together, and what's much more important is the profit per grid. So that's definitely much more important. That's why we're going to use the old price range again here. In this case, 350 grids is fine. We can also see here in the chart individually displayed where buying and selling takes place. Now, at the end of the day, it's about the investment amount in Bitunix or Tau. In my case, I will now use exactly $1,500 for the trading bot on Bitunix or Tau. Now at this point, it's extremely important. What leverage do we set? I see it time and again with many beginners that they act far too riskily with much too high leverage. So please definitely be careful with that. The higher the leverage, the higher the risk, obviously. That's the most important value. It's not necessarily the leverage itself anymore, but you always have to look at where your estimated liquidation price is. Let's set it to 10 times leverage now. Then you'll notice that the estimated liquidation price is at 110 US dollars, which is actually completely reasonable. We can also set the whole thing to 5 times leverage. Then we can see at this point how the estimated liquidation price also changes, dropping to just 100. In this case, the leverage is calculated differently than with a normal trade. Just as an example, if you set the leverage to 50 times, we can take a look at it, then in this case, the estimated liquidation price is only at $128. So you also have to keep in mind that Pionex acts accordingly, so that the trading bot doesn't get wiped out overnight. Yes, so the leverage calculation is a bit different in this case. In my case, for Bitunix or Tau, I will set a 5 times leverage. We can see here, the estimated liquidation price is at $100, and you always have to check for yourself. Where is $100 on the Bitunix or Tau chart? Let's take a look at it together. Around $100 is here, and it's definitely well below my worst case scenario. So, in my opinion, the likelihood that Bitunix or Tau will drop to $100 is extremely unrealistic, and that's why I will set a 5 times leverage here. Now in this case, we also have the option, it's optional, to set a trigger price. Personally, I won't do that because I want my trading bot to start working right away. So, theoretically, you could set it so that the trading bot only triggers at a certain price. But for me personally, that's not relevant, and all the data down here, like slippage control, I'll definitely leave as recommended. I've definitely had the best results, or rather the best experience with that. You could set take profit and stop loss. It all depends on how you configure the trading bot. Personally, I consciously choose not to do that. So I won't set a take profit or a stop loss because I want to stay flexible afterwards, and stop loss is only relevant if you have an extremely high leverage, so that you're basically afraid of getting liquidated. But in my case with Bitunix or Tau, I would only be liquidated at $100, and it's very unlikely that the price will ever drop that low again. That's why I can work here pretty confidently, so to speak, without a stop loss, without take profit, and generally speaking, it's rather uncommon anyway. So with trading, it's a completely different story. If you were watching a trading video from me right now, I would say you absolutely have to use a stop loss. Anyone who trades without a stop loss is making a big mistake, but when it comes to trading bots, it's definitely a different situation. Here, I deliberately want to work without a stop loss because I've factored my calculations in such a way that the liquidation price is below my worst case scenario. That's all for now on that topic. At the very end, you can also set the grid mode, in this case geometric or arithmetic. In my case, I always leave it set to arithmetic. That's definitely better, because in this case, the calculation across the grid is executed more effectively. If you're interested in more details, just take a quick screenshot and you can read through the text, but I'll stick with arithmetic, yes. And in this case, if everything fits, we have a final overview here. Here we can see the price range where the Bitunix or Tau bot is running. Number of grids, 350. Profit per grid is between 0.2 and 1.7. And that's perfectly fine. Slippage control is set above the recommended levels. That's fine too. Leverage is set at 5, which is perfectly acceptable. Investment, $1,500. That's simply my decision, my investment. But in reality, only $400 are actually invested at the end of the day. It's important to emphasize again that you also understand the principle behind the trading bot. In this case, we're only investing $460 in the trading bot, and the rest remains as margin, essentially as a form of protection to minimize the risk of liquidation. I really like the way Pionex handles all of this, and these are definitely the overall parameters here, and at the end of the day, estimated liquidation prices of $100 are also completely legitimate. Everything looks good to me, so I click on OK, and that's it. At this point, the trading bot is officially launched on Bitunix or Tau. That's definitely how it can look. That's how I personally do it. Now I've moved the face cam again. Now you can definitely see Tau US dollar here on the left side. Now the grid bot is running, it's working. If we now click on Bitunix or Tau on our trading bot, you'll be able to see here how the bot is working with the individual orders. I definitely like it a lot. Don't be surprised if you don't see the grid up here. That's simply the way Pionex displays it. The price range is obviously set up to $1,000, but in this case only the sell and buy orders around the current price are actually shown. That's all there is to say about that for now. A quick note before we continue with the next altcoin. To be honest, I almost forgot to mention this. So I personally trade on the Pionex platform. As I said, that's where I run all my trading bots. If you also want to take advantage of this opportunity and don't have a Pionex account yet, I've linked everything in the video description. There you'll find a direct link to Pionex. Please make sure not to click on any fake links. That's why I've included all the links in my video description, and if you use my link in the description, which I specifically arranged with Pionex, you as a community can also benefit from it. Specifically, if you use the link, you have the opportunity to get up to $500 completely free. And at the end of the day, an estimated liquidation price of $100 is also completely legitimate. Everything looks good to me, so I click OK here, and that's it. At this point, the trading bot is officially launched on Bitunix or Tau. That's definitely how it can look. That's how I personally do it. Now I've moved the face cam again. Now in any case, you can see Tau US dollar here on the left side. Now the grid bot is running, it's working. If we now click on Bitunix or Tau on our trading bot, you'll be able to see here how the bot is working with the individual orders. I definitely like it a lot. Don't be surprised if you don't see the grid up here. That's simply a display method used by Pionex. The price range is obviously set up to $1,000, but in this case, only the buy and sell orders around the current price are actually displayed. That's all there is to say about that for now. Just a quick note before we move on to the next altcoin. To be honest, I almost forgot to mention this. Personally, I trade on the Pionex platform. As I said, that's where I run all my trading bots. If you also want to take advantage of this opportunity and don't have an account on Pionex yet, I've linked everything in the video description. There you'll find a direct link to Pionex. Please make sure not to click on any fake links. That's why I've included all the links in my video description, and if you use my link in the description, which I specifically arranged with Pionex, you as a community can also benefit from it. By using the link, you have the chance to get up to $500 completely free, and you can try out all the trading bots, depending on how much you deposit into your Pionex account, using the link in my video description. Accordingly, you'll receive a bonus credited to your account. It's definitely a very nice offer, especially for beginners who want to get a feel for the platform first. If you're still unsure, you can definitely use the bonus here to start with. As I said, it's completely free depending on how much you deposit. That's all for now on that topic. Now let's move on to the next altcoin, which is Casper. At this point, I also really like the chart, and the trading bot itself is running very, very smoothly. Let's take a look at it here. Casper is, in this case, $200 in profit, 55%. As I said, I really like it. Let's go into the details here. What I do in this case with Casper, or rather what you can do if, for example, one of your trading bots is performing very well, or as in my case now with Casper, is I click here on Reinvest Profit. And now you have the option to compound all the profits that have been generated and use them again as margin. We can see here that the actual investment is $358. That's what I put in about 150 days ago. And now after reinvesting, we have $557 in here. So basically, our position has grown by 55%. Accordingly, the individual arbitrage in US dollars increases, and in this case, the estimated liquidation price rises to 4 US dollar cents. We can take a look at that on the chart. Currently, we're at 8 US dollar cents. At the moment, our estimated liquidation price is just 2 US dollar cents, so way down here. That's completely unrealistic anyway. If we take a look at the whole thing after our compounding, we go up to 4 US dollar cents. That's still completely legitimate, I'd say, as far as the price range is concerned. That's why I'm going to confirm everything at this point, and then we'll be able to see it here as well. Now, in this case, we can see the whole thing in the context of the trading bot. In this case, the entire trading bot had essentially lost its profit, but we used the profit to compound. As a result, our actual investment is now significantly larger. So now, in the long term, we basically have the opportunity to extract much more capital from this trading bot. But it should be said, as mentioned, the profits were reinvested. Of course, at the end of the day, this also carries a certain risk in quotation marks. Nevertheless, it should be said that everyone can assess the risk for themselves at this point. Currently, we have an estimated liquidation price of 4 US dollar cents. And as mentioned, 4 US dollar cents for Casper is the price range, and in this case, it's also below the level of my worst case scenario. That's why everything is still fine in this regard. We have extremely strong support here, once at this line, once in this area at 6 US dollar cents, and then again at 5 US dollar cents, which is also strong support. So for Casper to really drop down here and for us to be completely liquidated at 4 cents is very unrealistic, and that's why the settings also work for me here. That's why I did some compounding here. That's all for the topic of Casper. Let's continue with Solana. Up to now, I actually haven't set up a Solana future grid trading bot, so at the current price of 180 US dollars, I definitely want to set up a long bot here as well. I especially like the upward trend here a lot. In our KVBSO, we have a yellow cloud below us. I really like that as well. By the way, as I mentioned, you can get the indicator completely free of charge. It's my own in-house indicator, and everyone can get it for free in my Telegram group. I've also explained in the video description how you can join. Otherwise, as I said, the overall package with Solana is really fitting at the moment, which is why I'm going to set up the next future grid trading bot here. Let's go back over to the future grid trading bot and set it up manually. In this case, we'll enter Solana up here. Make sure to select Solana USDT Perpetual. That's definitely the right setting. Set it manually here. I'm not going to go into as much detail about it this time. By now, you know the principle and what I pay attention to. I always look at a worst case scenario. I definitely want the trading bot to keep running all the way down to 90 US dollars. That's why I'm entering 90 US dollars here. My price target for Solana is roughly 300 US dollars. But I should also mention here, if Solana really does reach those highs, it's quite possible that I'll adjust the price range upward to 400 or even $500. So please don't think or comment something like, "Hey Vincent, do you really think Solana will only go up to 300 US dollars or something like that?" No, I don't think that, but that's just how I want to start the bot for now, because later on I can still make a lot of adjustments, and that's something I really like about Pionex, that you have a lot of flexibility afterwards and you're not necessarily stuck with parameters you set up once and can never change again. So that's definitely not the case with Pionex. So now we'll move on here to the number of grids. We can also take a look at that. In this case, the recommended number is 233. That actually fits. As I said, I pay attention here to keep it between 0.2 and let's say 1.5 or 1.7, just like I mentioned earlier. So 230 actually fits quite well in this case. So it's not wrong per se what Pionex is suggesting to you here. Still, please always double check it, because in my experience, it's often the case that too many grids are recommended, since logically, every single buy and every single sell is another fee for Pionex. That's why it's clear that they often go a bit overboard with it. So 220 fits very well, because that puts me exactly in the range, let's say, that I want to be in terms of profit per grid. I really like that. Now we need to look at, okay, what do we put in? In this case with Solana, I want to invest 2,000 US dollars into the trading bot. Here too, I look very closely. Where is my liquidation price? In this case, 46 US dollars with a 3x leverage. That's actually quite manageable in terms of risk. So 46 US dollars, everyone can form their own opinion about that. That would be way down at the bottom of Solana's price range. It's extremely, extremely unrealistic that we'd even come close to hitting that. That's why in this case, I actually find it legitimate to set the leverage a bit higher. So at this point, I'm going to increase the leverage to 7. Let's take a look at the whole thing. You can see here, the estimated liquidation price is at 70 US dollars. Let's take another look at Solana, 70 US dollars. So we can visualize the whole thing, and that's how you should always approach it with your trading bot. Where could you potentially get liquidated? 70 US dollars is completely reasonable for me. It's totally fine, because there's still strong support below us here. I don't think Solana will drop much below $100 again, and as I said, at the latest, I'll be liquidated at 70 US dollars. That works for me too. As I said, you always have to look closely. What kind of altcoin is it? In this case, Solana is a bit more stable than some tiny altcoins. That's why I specifically showed you the losses earlier. So if you look at my history here, you'll see that I also set up trading bots for smaller altcoins that didn't perform as well. And that's why I'm a bit more confident with Solana. That's why I'm putting 2,000 US dollars in here as well. In this case with 220 grids and a total leverage of 7, because the liquidation price is still perfectly fine. Here as well, it's set to arithmetic. But that's why for me the overall package fits here too. I click on OK, and then you can already hear that the trading bot has been started. And now you can see here again, if I move the face cam, you can see right here that Solana is running with a leverage of 7 on long. I'm deliberately using a slightly higher leverage now because I'm really bullish for the next few days. I definitely want to take advantage of the current correction. That's why I'm using a leverage of 7 here, but please don't get me wrong. So with the smaller coins, I use a slightly lower leverage as well. A leverage of 3 or 4 is usually recommended there, especially if you're setting up new trading bots. At the end of the day, it always depends on where your liquidation price is. That's basically when your trading bot is completely dead. In that case, you're 100% in the red. You always have to keep that in mind in such cases. Otherwise, let's move on to SUI now. At the moment, I also quite like the chart there. I don't want to invest too much in this case yet, because I could even imagine something like that happening again. That's why what I'm doing with SUI right now, I already have a trading bot running there. It's actually, to be honest, more or less at break even. Here, I click on detail. Then, with SUI as well, I have the option, if I click on Add Investment, to inject more capital here. That's exactly what I'd like to do at this point. Again, with 1,000 US dollars in this case. So you can also see, so to speak, what happens in this situation. In this case, I'm adding 1,000 US dollars. A total of 450 US dollars goes into the trading bot, and the rest is margin. It's also important to keep in mind, not everything goes directly into the bot itself. Part of it is also set aside as collateral, so here we have an estimated liquidation price of 70 US cents. Let's quickly check again where 70 US cents are. In the case of SUI, 70 US cents is exactly in this range. So here as well, it's very, very unrealistic that such a massive crash would happen again with SUI. That's why I also feel relatively safe with the trading bot. As I said, SUI would have to drop 78% for us to get liquidated, which is extremely unrealistic. And that's why everything fits for me here as well. I click on OK, and then in this case, I've also added the margin here. We can now see the reserve margin at this point. A total of $1,000 with an actual investment of $860. So everything definitely fits here as well. That's all for the topic of SUI. Next, we'll continue with the next altcoin, which is Pepe. I know meme coins have a bit of a bad reputation in the German-speaking world. Some people say they completely stay away from them on principle. And that's totally fine, completely legitimate. Still, I personally want to include them in all my trading bots. If I take a look at everything, I now have a lot invested in DeFi projects, utility projects, and Layer 1 projects. In this case, the only trading bot I have running on a meme coin is Dogecoin, which is already very well established. I also like it a lot, and especially with meme coins, you can really take advantage of the volatility. Sometimes trading bots actually work best with those in particular. This isn't a direct recommendation, but I still want to at least have a trading bot running on one meme coin. It should also be mentioned here that in the case of PP, the volatility or risk isn't all that high. It has also become quite well established by now. The chart looks clean. We're seeing a nice upward trend. We're now setting up the trading bot perfectly based on a structural low, which is generally a good move after a rally. And that's why I just want us to have a reference value here with Pepe as well. At the end of the day, you don't have to copy what I'm doing here. You can just follow along with me and then decide for yourself whether Pepe is worthwhile or not. Of course, the risk here is slightly higher simply because it's a meme coin. Things like this can obviously backfire, but I still want to take a position here. Otherwise, when I look at the chart, by the way, you can do this. You can right click and then select copy price and then you can paste it in. And I also want to copy the price from the top, copy price upper limit. So in this case, everything is set. A total of 500 grids is recommended here. For me personally, that's definitely too much. I want to set it to a maximum of 300. As you can see here, I prefer to set things up more conservatively because Pepe itself is already quite volatile. I don't really need to add a ton of grids on top of that. At the end of the day, it would just eat up fees unnecessarily. Although, it has to be said, the fees for trading bots are actually very reasonable. So you don't really have to worry too much about fees, but still, I don't want to go overboard with a meme coin like Pepe. That's why I'm putting in another $1,000 here in total. A 3x leverage is fine too. I really don't need 5x or 10x leverage with Pepe. That's completely legitimate, so it's totally fine to set it up like this at this point. Everything works for me here as well. So at this point, the trading bot is now officially launched. Now let's set up the next trading bot. Like I said, I'm setting up quite a few today because I currently see a really good opportunity in the market. That's why I also want to open a position with the altcoin SAI because things are actually looking pretty good there as well. It's just so I can diversify a bit among all the trading bots. That's definitely a recommendation. Don't put everything into a single trading bot. It's better to set up a handful. In my case, I'm doing a bit more now. I also have the opportunity, and for me, the whole point is to treat this as a kind of self-experiment so that you can follow everything live. So, as a general recommendation, I would say to build your trading bot portfolio with between 5 and 10 trading bots. In my case with 12, it's already quite a lot, I have to admit. So I personally wouldn't diversify this much in my private portfolio, but here, purely for demonstration purposes and for the video, I naturally want to gather a lot of experience and reference values. The more data I have at the end of the day about different parameters and various altcoins, the better I can draw a conclusion for you, so to speak. That's basically the whole point of these videos. That's why I will definitely set up SAI again as well. I'm gonna do the whole thing live for you right now. What I always pay attention to, overall, are the individual structure lows and structure highs. In this case, I copy the price, paste it in here, and also the high point. And as I said, you don't have to be ultra strict here or stress yourself out about exactly where to set the price range. Always use the last structure low and the last structure high, maybe a bit above, because at the end of the day, you can always adjust it later if something changes. If something changes here. Of course, it still has to be roughly correct. In this case, 500 grids are recommended again. In my opinion, once again, that's too much. That's why I'm setting it to 300 grids here as well. In this case, I'm using a 4x leverage and will again be working with a total of $1,000. The estimated liquidation price is just 5 cents. Alright, so let's take another quick look at the chart. Guys, 5 cents is somewhere down here. It's actually even below this low. That's why I actually want to increase the leverage a bit here, simply because we still have plenty of room to the downside. In this case, it's now 6 cents. Just to quickly illustrate again, 6 cents, where we would be liquidated, is below this low here. That's roughly at this level. At this point, we would be liquidated with SI. So as I said, it's incredibly unrealistic. That's why, at the end of the day, everything fits for me here as well. I'll set the whole thing up, and then we can see here that the trading bot has been started. And now we're already coming to the conclusion to the last trading bot. And what would a trading bot update video be without a new Bitcoin trading bot? At the end of the day, Bitcoin is the big driving force, and I always say it makes sense to hold Bitcoin in your own portfolio or to set up a trading bot for it. We are already pretty heavy on altcoins, I have to say. We now have a lot of altcoin trading bots open, so it definitely makes sense to set up another Bitcoin trading bot, simply so that you have a clean structure here as well. Now, of course, you might ask yourself, how do you set all these price ranges here? Personally, I don't think that Bitcoin is going to drop significantly again. That's why I'm going to enter $100,000 here. For me, that's also a bit of a psychological barrier. In general, it's never really recommended to set the price range exactly at round numbers, but the 100,000 mark is actually pretty important for Bitcoin. That would be exactly this level. And later, if a major crash ever happens, I can always adjust the price range downward. Otherwise, for now, my upper limit is 140,000 US dollars. Why is it 140,000 US dollars in my case? Let's take a look at Bitcoin at this point. For me personally, that's where the next price target lies, specifically at the 2.414 Fibonacci level. This also aligns very well with the current global liquidity, so I can definitely imagine that we'll see higher prices for Bitcoin again in the coming weeks. That's why, for me, it actually makes sense right now to set up another bot at exactly 112,000 US dollars. I'll move the facecam to the left again at this point. Let's click on recommended. What's being recommended? 71 grids is actually perfectly fine here. So for the first time in a while, I'm actually satisfied with the recommendation. So that actually fits. You could even do 80 grids. That would be fine too. But you have to say Bitcoin isn't as volatile as all the altcoins, so as I said, it's a bit different here. 0.3 to 0.4 also works for me personally. So everything is definitely fine here as well. And we can also see the individual buy and sell orders here. So it does make sense, yes, how the trading bot is set up in this case. So you can always get an idea of it here at any time. If you even take a look at the whole thing on an hourly basis for Bitcoin, you can see the current gaps here. So for me personally, it does make sense to set the gaps like this. Here, 113, 200, up to 100. So that's about $400 in price difference per grid. That's definitely fine. In this case, I would also set a slightly higher leverage. In this case, I will invest a total of 4,000 US dollars in the Bitcoin US dollar trading bot. If I were to use a leverage of 10, we would have a liquidation price of 88,000 US dollars. Honestly, that's actually pretty reasonable. It would be roughly in that price range. So in my opinion, if you really think about it, 88,000 US dollars would actually mean we're in a bear market. That would mean the whole structure is broken. Theoretically, it's fine. Still, I would say it's a bit too much because I would slip into the negative pretty quickly if there were another correction. An 8 times leverage would be 86,000 US dollars. So that fits roughly within the price range for me. 7 or 8 times leverage. So in this case, we now have an estimated liquidation price of 84,000 US dollars. In my opinion, that's also fine. The arithmetic works out here as well, so that's why I'm going to set up the entire Bitcoin trading bot here. You can see all the settings here at this point. I click on OK once, and then the Bitcoin bot is officially set up here as well. We can see everything again here, in this case on the left side, what the bot is actually doing. And this is what the complete trading bots look like at the end of the day. So now you have a complete overview once again. Now in the case of Bitcoin, I have also taken on a slightly higher risk. It should be mentioned that there are $4,000 invested here. It should also be mentioned that it's a 7x leverage. Please be aware of the risk. In my case, I have to say, I'm still confident nonetheless. I just can't imagine that we'll drop significantly below 100,000 US dollars again. Personally, I would definitely be surprised, and I also don't believe that this bull market is over or anything like that, as I've seen in some other comments. That's why, for me, it's legitimate to use this leverage. If you're unsure, please use lower leverage. I definitely don't want anyone from my community to get burned. Otherwise, of course, please make sure to use the free capital here first. So depending on what you deposit, you can try things out here first, test the platform, and so on. As I said, everything is linked in the video description, and I think with today's update video about the trading bots, to be honest, it went on much longer than planned. Honestly, I thought I would just do 20 minutes, half an hour here, but it actually went on a bit longer. But I think you really got a comprehensive overview of trading bots here. It was definitely important to me to go more in depth here, to go into more detail. At the end of the day, you shouldn't make it too complicated. There are a ton of possibilities here. Yes, as a beginner on this platform, you can feel totally overwhelmed, and of course things like Futures Moon, BTC Moon, or whatever else sound cool. But I can definitely speak from experience that a lot of it is unnecessary at the end of the day. As I said, Pionex is an absolutely top platform. I've been using it privately for almost 3 years now. I've been making YouTube videos about it for 2.5 years now, and I've only had positive experiences. But when it comes to trading bots, you have to say that some of them are unnecessary, some you really don't need, and that's why I've clearly shown here what you should focus on, with which settings, which parameters, and so on. So you're definitely fully equipped in that regard. Of course, I hope that you enjoyed today's video and that it provided you with a lot of added value. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. It's definitely extremely important that you stay up to date. Everything is linked in the video description, both my Telegram group and of course the link to the Pionex platform itself. That's all for now. If you have any questions, just write to me, leave a comment, or whatever works for you. Otherwise, I'd say we'll see each other again in the next video.